It began, as most catastrophes do, with arrogance. Not ours, though we've certainly had our share, but theirs. Theirs was a species born in the cold void between stars, forged in the gravity wells of collapsing suns, and tempered by eons of conquest. They called themselves the Korrath, a name that, when spoken aloud, sounded like the grinding of tectonic plates. For millennia, they had swept across galaxies like a storm, their fleets blackening the skies of countless worlds. And at their helm stood General Rossinante. Rossinante was a legend even among his own kind. His form was a towering amalgam of sinew and bioalloy, his 6 eyes glowing with a predatory light that could pierce the hull of a battleship. He did not speak in words but in commands, each one a decree that reshaped the fate of entire star systems. He had shattered empires, extinguished species, and brought civilizations to their knees with the efficiency of a machine and the cruelty of a god. And yet, for all his victories, there was one thing Rossinante despised above all else: defiance. To him, resistance was an insult, a speck of dust daring to stand against a hurricane. So when his scouts reported that Earth, a backwater planet circling an unremarkable star on the fringes of the Milky Way, had not only refused to surrender, but had fought back against his vanguard ships, well, that was unacceptable. I remember the day his fleet arrived. The sky tore open like a wound as thousands of Korrath dreadnoughts descended through the atmosphere. They weren't subtle about it either. Subtlety wasn't their style. Entire cities were bathed in shadow as their ships blotted out the sun. The air hummed with energy as their weapons charged, massive plasma cannons capable of reducing mountains to ash with a single shot. We weren't ready for them. How could we be? Our wars were petty things fought over borders and ideologies. Theirs were apocalyptic campaigns waged across dimensions. They had technology that made our most advanced machines look like toys. Their soldiers were genetically engineered nightmares, hulking brutes with exoskeletal armor and claws that could shred steel. But humans, well, we have this annoying habit of not knowing when to quit. The first wave hit New York City. They didn't bother with diplomacy or demands. They just started firing. Buildings crumbled like sandcastles under their bombardment. People screamed and ran for cover as their soldiers marched through the streets, methodically exterminating anything that moved. And yet, amidst the chaos, something remarkable happened. Ordinary people, construction workers, shopkeepers, teachers started fighting back. They used whatever they could find: crowbars, kitchen knives, even baseball bats. It was suicidal, yes, but it slowed the Korrath down just enough for our military to regroup. I was there when General Rossinante himself descended onto Earth's surface for the first time. He stood atop what used to be Times Square, a colossus surveying his domain, and declared in his guttural voice that humanity would be wiped from existence within 3 rotations of our planet. But we didn't give him 3 days. Our scientists worked around the clock to analyze their technology. Our engineers scavenged parts from downed enemy ships to build weapons capable of piercing their armor. Our hackers infiltrated their communication networks and fed them false information about troop movements and supply lines. And then there were the guerrilla fighters, the men and women who refused to bow even in the face of annihilation. They struck from the shadows, sabotaging enemy equipment and ambushing patrols before vanishing into the ruins. Rossinante didn't understand it at first. To him, we were nothing more than vermin, a nuisance to be exterminated. But as his forces began to falter under our relentless attacks, he started to realize that humanity wasn't like any other species he'd encountered before. We weren't stronger than him, or smarter than him, or more advanced than him. But we were stubborn as hell. And that's when things got interesting. Rossinante underestimated us. That was his first mistake. His second was assuming we would remain fragmented, squabbling over borders and ideologies while his forces turned our cities to rubble. But humans, for all our flaws, are at our best when the stakes are existential. And it was in those darkest hours that a leader emerged, a man who would galvanize humanity into a single, defiant force. His name was Elias Grant, a former general turned diplomat. Grant had spent decades navigating the labyrinth of geopolitics, brokering peace between nations that had once been on the brink of war. He was not a man of bluster or bravado. He was calm, calculating, and profoundly pragmatic. When the Korrath invasion began, Grant was serving as Secretary General of the United Nations, a position that had long been dismissed as ceremonial in the face of global discord. But under his leadership, it became something else entirely: humanity's war council. I remember his first broadcast to the world after Rossinante's ultimatum. The Korrath had given us 3 days to surrender or face annihilation. The world's leaders were paralyzed with fear, some even considering capitulation. But Grant stood before the cameras, his voice steady and unyielding. "They think we are weak," he said, his words echoing across every screen on Earth. "They think we are divided. They think we will kneel before their might. But they do not understand what it means to be human. We do not surrender. We do not break. And we will not go quietly into the night." It was a speech that would be studied in history classes for centuries to come, assuming we survived, of course. Grant's first move was to convene an emergency summit of world leaders. It wasn't easy. Mistrust ran deep, and old rivalries flared even in the face of extinction. But Grant had a way of cutting through the noise, reminding everyone that this wasn't about nations anymore. It was about survival. Slowly but surely, he forged an alliance unlike anything the world had ever seen. Under Grant's direction, humanity began to mobilize on an unprecedented scale. Factories that once produced cars and consumer goods were repurposed to build weapons and armor. Scientists from rival nations pooled their knowledge to reverse engineer Korrath technology, creating hybrid weapons that could pierce their defenses. Even space agencies like NASA and Roscosmos joined forces, launching satellites and drones to monitor enemy movements. But it wasn't just about technology or firepower. It was about strategy. Grant understood that we couldn't win a conventional war against the Korrath. Their ships were too advanced, their soldiers too powerful. Instead, he turned to asymmetrical warfare, guerrilla tactics designed to exploit their arrogance and overconfidence. He called it Operation Hydra. The idea was simple: strike everywhere at once. Small, mobile units would launch coordinated attacks on Korrath supply lines, communication hubs, and forward bases, forcing them to spread their forces thin. It was a strategy born out of desperation, but executed with surgical precision. And it worked, at least for a while. Rossinante was furious. His forces were supposed to crush us effortlessly. Yet here we were, bleeding them dry with hit-and-run attacks and sabotage missions. He responded by escalating his campaign of terror, targeting civilian populations in an attempt to break our morale. But if there's one thing you should know about humans, it's this: we don't break easily. In fact, Rossinante's brutality only strengthened our resolve. Images of destroyed cities and massacred innocents galvanized people around the world to join the fight. Farmers became snipers. Engineers became hackers. Doctors became medics on the front lines. Even children played their part, spreading propaganda leaflets and acting as couriers for resistance cells. Grant himself never took up arms. He didn't need to. His weapon was his mind, and he wielded it like a blade. He coordinated every aspect of our resistance from an undisclosed bunker deep beneath Geneva, a nerve center where generals and scientists worked side by side under his command. But as brilliant as Grant was, even he couldn't foresee what came next. On the second day of Rossinante's ultimatum, something extraordinary happened. A Korrath defector appeared in orbit above Earth, a lone scout ship broadcasting a message of peace. Its pilot introduced herself as Korrath, a former lieutenant in Rossinante's fleet who had grown disillusioned with his genocidal crusade. Korrath claimed she could help us, provide intelligence on Korrath troop movements and vulnerabilities, but only if we could guarantee her safety from both sides. It was a gamble. Some suspected it was a trap designed to sow discord among us. But Grant took the risk. He arranged for Korrath to be brought to Geneva under heavy guard, where she revealed critical information about Rossinante's flagship, the Oblivion Spear. According to her, its power core relied on a rare isotope that could be destabilized with enough concentrated energy, a potential Achilles heel in an otherwise invincible fleet. The plan that followed was audacious, bordering on suicidal. Infiltrate the Oblivion Spear, plant an explosive device near its power core, and detonate it before Rossinante could retaliate. Grant knew there was only one person who could lead such a mission. Captain Sarah Hayes of the International Space Command, a decorated astronaut who had narrowly survived one of Rossinante's initial attacks on Earth's orbital defenses. Hayes didn't hesitate when asked. She knew what was at stake. As she prepared for what might very well be her final mission, Grant addressed humanity one last time. "This is our moment," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "Not just to survive, but to prove that no matter how powerful our enemies may be, no matter how dark the night, humanity will always find a way." And with that, Captain Hayes launched into history or oblivion on what would become known as the Final Gambit. Captain Sarah Hayes had always been a symbol of courage, but as the shuttle carrying her and her strike team ascended toward the Oblivion Spear, even she felt the weight of what lay ahead. The plan was as elegant as it was reckless. Infiltrate Rossinante's flagship using stolen Korrath stealth technology, plant a destabilizing charge near its power core, and escape before the ensuing explosion tore the ship, and hopefully Rossinante himself, apart. It was a 1-in-a-million shot, but humanity had long since run out of safer options. The shuttle's interior was silent, except for the hum of its engines and the occasional whispered prayer from one of the team members. Hayes glanced at her crew, 6 soldiers handpicked from across the globe, each an expert in their field. There was Corporal Singh, a demolition specialist from India, Lieutenant Alvarez, an ex-Marine sniper from Colombia, and Dr. Elena Markov, a Russian physicist who had helped design the charge they were carrying. The others were just as skilled, just as determined. They all knew this mission was likely a death sentence, but none of them had hesitated to volunteer. As they approached the Oblivion Spear, its sheer scale became apparent. The ship wasn't just massive, it was monumental, a floating city bristling with weapons and defenses. Its hull gleamed with an eerie black sheen that seemed to absorb light itself, and its spires jutted out like jagged teeth poised to devour the stars. This was no mere warship. It was a statement of dominance, a monument to Rossinante's unyielding will. Korrath's stolen codes worked as promised. The shuttle slipped past the Oblivion Spear's automated defenses undetected, docking in a maintenance bay deep within its underbelly. The team disembarked quickly, their movements precise and silent. Every second counted. But then something unusual happened, something no one could have anticipated. As they made their way through the labyrinthine corridors of the ship, guided by Korrath's intelligence, Hayes began to notice anomalies. At first, it was subtle. Flickering lights in hallways that should have been pristine, strange echoes that didn't match their own footsteps. Then came the sounds, low whispers in a language none of them recognized, but all of them felt in their bones. "What the hell is that?" Singh muttered as they passed a bulkhead covered in what looked like scorch marks. Except they weren't scorch marks. They were symbols, etched into the metal with precision that seemed almost organic. "Keep moving," Hayes ordered, though her voice betrayed her unease. The deeper they went, the stranger things became. They found rooms filled with machinery unlike anything Korrath had described, pulsing with an unnatural glow that seemed to warp the air around it. In one chamber, they discovered what appeared to be remains, not human remains or even Korrath remains, but something else entirely. Twisted forms frozen mid-scream, their features alien yet disturbingly familiar. Markov stopped to examine one of them, her face pale. "These aren't Korrath," she whispered. This predates them." "What are you saying?" Alvarez asked sharply. "I'm saying," Markov replied, "that this ship is older than we thought. Much older." Hayes didn't like where this was going. "Focus on the mission," she snapped. "Whatever this is, it's not our problem right now." But deep down, she knew it was their problem, because whatever had left those remains behind wasn't gone. It was still here. The first attack came without warning. One moment, they were moving through a dimly lit corridor. The next, something lashed out from the shadows, a blur of movement that slammed into one of the soldiers at the rear of their formation. He didn't even have time to scream before he was dragged into the darkness. "Contact!" Hayes shouted, raising her weapon as chaos erupted around them. The thing or things that attacked them weren't Korrath soldiers. They moved too fast for that, their forms shifting and writhing as though they were made of liquid shadow. Bullets seemed to slow them down, but didn't stop them entirely. It took concentrated fire from multiple angles to bring one down. When it finally collapsed to the floor, writhing in its death throes, Markov knelt beside it for a closer look and immediately recoiled in horror. "It's not alive," she said hoarsely. "At least, not in any way we understand." Hayes stared at the creature's remains, a mass of black tendrils that seemed to dissolve into vapor before her eyes, and felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't part of Kael'Thara's intel, because Kael'Thara didn't know about it either. "What are these things?" Singh asked nervously. "I don't know," Hayes admitted grimly. "But we're running out of time." They pressed on, their pace quickening despite the growing sense of dread that hung over them like a shroud. Whatever these creatures were, whatever force had created them, they seemed to be concentrated near the power core itself. And then they found it, a massive chamber at the heart of the ship where energy pulsed through conduits as thick as tree trunks. The core itself floated in midair, a sphere of crackling energy surrounded by rotating rings inscribed with more of those strange symbols. But they weren't alone. Standing before the core was Rossinante himself. He turned slowly as they entered, his 6 eyes glowing like molten gold in the dim light. His voice rumbled through the chamber like an earthquake. "You are bold," he said, his tone almost amused, "to come here to my throne to defy me so openly." Hayes raised her weapon without hesitation. "Bold enough to end you." Rossinante tilted his head slightly, as if considering her words. Then he laughed, a deep, resonant sound that sent shivers down their spines. "You think you understand what you're fighting against," he said softly. "But you do not know this ship's true purpose, or its true master." Before anyone could react, he raised one massive hand, and suddenly everything changed. The symbols on the walls began to glow brighter and brighter until they filled the chamber with blinding light. The air itself seemed to ripple and distort as reality bent under some unseen force. And then they heard it, a voice, not Rossinante's voice, but something far older and far more terrible, speaking directly into their minds. "You are not welcome here." For a moment that stretched into eternity, Hayes felt as though she were standing on the edge of an abyss staring into infinity itself, a vast intelligence beyond comprehension reaching out to touch her very soul. And then it was gone. When she came back to herself, she realized 2 things. First, Rossinante was no longer laughing. Second, whatever lived inside the ship wasn't on his side either anymore. The decision to deploy nuclear weapons came after hours of heated debate in the War Council. Elias Grant, ever the pragmatist, had resisted the idea at first. Nuclear weapons were a last resort, not just because of their destructive power, but because of what they represented, the ultimate failure of diplomacy, strategy, and restraint. But as reports poured in from across the globe, cities reduced to ash, resistance fighters overwhelmed by Korrath reinforcements, and Captain Hayes' team still unaccounted for aboard the Oblivion Spear, it became clear that humanity was running out of options. Grant stood before the gathered leaders of the world, his face grim. "If we do this," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of history, "we're not just fighting for survival. We're making a statement to Rossinante, to the Korrath, and to whatever comes after them. We're saying that humanity will not go quietly into extinction." The room was silent. Then Russian President Dmitry Volkov spoke up. "We have the weapons," he said bluntly. "The RS-28 Sarmat missiles, Satan II, as your NATO calls them, are ready. They can carry MIRV payloads capable of dispersing multiple warheads over a wide area." Grant nodded slowly. "And what about precision? We can't risk detonating these over Earth's surface." Volkov's lips curled into a thin smile. "The Sarmats are equipped with hypersonic glide vehicles. They can be programmed for high-altitude detonation above the Korrath fleet. The EMP alone will cripple their systems." "And what about collateral damage?" asked Prime Minister Adebayo of Nigeria. "What happens if we trigger a chain reaction in their ships? The fallout could devastate our atmosphere." "That's a risk we'll have to take," Grant said quietly. but we'll minimize it as much as possible. Target their largest ships, the ones in low orbit, and detonate far enough away from Earth to avoid catastrophic fallout. The plan was set in motion within hours. Russian RS-28 Sarmat missiles were loaded with MIRV warheads designed for high-altitude dispersal. Each warhead carried smaller submunitions, conventional explosives enhanced with reverse-engineered Korrath tech to maximize their impact against alien defenses. As the world watched from bunkers and shelters, 6 Sarmat missiles roared into the sky from silos deep within Siberia. Their trajectories were carefully calculated to intercept key targets within the Korrath fleet. Dreadnoughts that served as command hubs, carriers deploying wave after wave of soldiers, and orbital platforms raining destruction upon Earth's surface. The first missile reached its target within minutes. At an altitude of 300 kilometers above Earth's surface, it deployed its MIRV payload, a cluster of smaller warheads that spread out like deadly petals from a steel flower. The resulting explosions lit up the night sky like a second sun, their shock waves rippling through space. For a moment, it seemed as though humanity had struck a decisive blow. Several Korrath ships were obliterated outright. Others were left drifting and powerless as their systems short-circuited under the EMP bursts. But then, something unusual happened. As the dust cleared, sensors picked up an unexpected energy surge emanating from the Oblivion Spear. The ship's core, the same one Captain Hayes' team had been sent to sabotage, was glowing brighter than ever before, its energy output spiking to levels far beyond what should have been possible. In Geneva, Grant stared at the data streaming in on his monitors. "What's happening?" he demanded. Dr. Elena Markov's voice crackled over the comms from her position aboard one of Earth's remaining orbital stations. It's reacting to the explosions," she said, her tone laced with both awe and terror. "The core is absorbing the energy from our attacks and amplifying it." Grant felt his stomach drop. "Are you saying we've made it stronger?" "Not exactly," Markov replied. "It's destabilizing, but not in a way we expected. If this continues..." She didn't need to finish her sentence. Everyone in that room understood what she meant. If the Oblivion Spear's core went critical, it wouldn't just destroy Rossinante's flagship. It could trigger a chain reaction that might annihilate half the planet. "Abort any further launches," Grant ordered immediately. "We need to regroup." But before he could issue further commands, another transmission came through. This one from Captain Hayes herself. "We're still here," she said, her voice strained but resolute. "Rossinante is dead." The room erupted into chaos at her words. "Repeat that," Grant demanded. "Rossinante is dead," Hayes confirmed. "We managed to plant the charge near the core and detonate it while he was distracted by something else." "What do you mean, something else?" Grant asked sharply. Hayes hesitated before replying. "There's something inside this ship," she said finally. "Something older than Rossinante or the Korrath. Something they woke up when they started using this technology." Grant felt a chill run down his spine. "Can you contain it?" "We're trying," Hayes replied grimly. "But whatever it is, it doesn't care about us or them. It just wants out." As her words sank in, alarms began blaring across Geneva Command. "What now?" Grant demanded. Markov's voice cut through the chaos once more. "The core is destabilizing faster than we thought. It's going to blow." Grant turned back to Hayes' transmission. "Captain, get your team out of there now." But Hayes shook her head. "There's no time," she said softly. And then she smiled, a small, defiant smile that spoke volumes. "Tell them we fought," she said simply. The transmission cut out before anyone could respond. Moments later, the Oblivion Spear erupted in a blinding explosion visible even from Earth's surface. A supernova of light and energy that consumed everything in its path. When it was over, silence reigned. For several agonizing minutes, no one spoke or moved as they waited for confirmation, for any sign that humanity had survived its darkest hour. And then reports began trickling in. Korrath ships retreating en masse, their remaining forces scattering like leaves before a storm, Earth's skies clearing for the first time in weeks. Against all odds, and at unimaginable cost, humanity had won. But as Grant stared at the smoldering remains of Rossinante's fleet on his monitor screen, he couldn't shake one lingering question. What had they unleashed? The explosion of the Oblivion Spear was unlike anything humanity had ever witnessed. Even from the surface of Earth, the sky lit up with a brilliance that turned night into day, a kaleidoscope of colors that seemed to ripple across the heavens. The shockwave rippled through space, tearing apart Korrath's ships caught too close to the blast radius and sending others careening into disarray. For a moment, it felt as though the entire planet held its breath. And then silence. In Geneva Command, Elias Grant stood frozen, staring at the monitors as data streamed in. The Oblivion Spear, Rossinante's invincible flagship, the symbol of Korrath dominance, was gone. Its debris scattered across orbit like glittering shards of a broken crown. But there was no time for celebration. The danger wasn't over yet. Status report, Grant barked, his voice cutting through the stunned silence in the war room. Dr. Elena Markov's voice came through the comms from her orbital station. The core's energy signature has dissipated, she said, her tone a mix of relief and exhaustion. Whatever was building up inside it, it's gone. The chain reaction didn't trigger. Grant exhaled slowly, but his relief was short-lived. And Captain Hayes? Markov hesitated. We lost contact just before the detonation. The room fell silent again. Everyone knew what that meant, but no one wanted to say it out loud. Grant closed his eyes for a moment, then straightened his shoulders. She knew what she was doing, he said quietly. She gave us this victory. But even as he spoke, new reports began flooding in from around the globe. Korrath forces were retreating. Their once coordinated assaults had devolved into chaos as their chain of command collapsed without Rossinante to guide them. Squadrons of alien soldiers abandoned their posts and fled into orbit, leaving behind weapons and equipment that would later become invaluable to humanity's recovery efforts. It wasn't just Earth that had been liberated. Across the galaxy, resistance movements on other occupied worlds reported similar breakthroughs. The death of Rossinante had sent shockwaves through the Korrath Empire, shattering its unity and sparking uprisings in places that had long since given up hope. But humanity wasn't content to simply survive. Under Grant's leadership, they seized the moment to strike back. Over the next several weeks, a coalition of Earth's remaining military forces launched a coordinated counteroffensive against the remnants of the Korrath fleet still lingering in orbit. Using scavenged alien technology reverse-engineered by human scientists, they developed hybrid spacecraft capable of engaging Korrath ships on equal footing. The battles were fierce and costly. Every inch of space reclaimed came at a heavy price. But humanity's newfound unity proved to be its greatest weapon. Nations that had once been rivals now fought side by side as allies, their combined strength overwhelming even the most entrenched Korrath positions. Kel'Thra, the Korrath defector who had risked everything to help humanity, became an unlikely hero in this final phase of the war. Her knowledge of Korrath tactics and technology was instrumental in turning the tide, and though many humans still viewed her with suspicion, she earned their respect through her actions on the battlefield. It was Kel'Thra who led a daring raid on one of the last remaining Korrath command ships, a mission that not only secured vital intelligence, but also captured several high-ranking officers who would later stand trial for their crimes against countless worlds. By the time Earth's forces destroyed the final Korrath dreadnought hovering above South America, it was clear humanity had won. The aftermath of the war was both triumphant and sobering. The cost had been staggering. Billions dead, entire cities reduced to rubble, ecosystems disrupted by orbital bombardments and fallout from nuclear detonations. But amidst the ruins emerged something extraordinary, a united Earth. Under Grant's leadership, humanity began rebuilding, not as fractured nations, but as one people bound by shared sacrifice and determination. The United Nations transformed into a true global government with real authority, overseeing reconstruction efforts and ensuring that no one was left behind. Technology salvaged from Korrath ships accelerated humanity's progress by decades, perhaps centuries. Advances in energy production, medicine, and transportation revolutionized life on Earth almost overnight. But these gifts came with a warning. Never again would humanity allow itself to be caught unprepared for an existential threat. To that end, Grant spearheaded the creation of an interplanetary defense force, the Terran Vanguard, tasked with protecting Earth from future invasions and exploring beyond our solar system to ensure we were never blindsided again. Statues were erected in honor of those who had given their lives for humanity's survival. Captain Sarah Hayes and her team, resistance fighters who had held out against impossible odds, civilians who had refused to bow even when faced with annihilation. And yet, there were questions that lingered, questions no one could answer. What exactly had lived inside the Oblivion Spear? What force had spoken through those ancient symbols etched into its walls? And why had it turned against Rossinante in those final moments? Kel'Thuzad offered only cryptic insights. The Korrath didn't build that ship, she said during one debriefing session. They found it, drifting in deep space, and repurposed it for their conquests. When asked who, or what, had built it originally, she could only shake her head. Some things are better left unknown. But humanity wasn't content with ignorance. Scientists and explorers began piecing together fragments of data recovered from Korrath systems, searching for clues about what lay beyond our galaxy and what other dangers might await us there. For now, though, Earth celebrated its hard-won freedom. Years later, Elias Grant stood on a hill overlooking what had once been New York City, a skyline now dominated by gleaming towers built with hybrid human-alien technology. Beside him stood Kel'Thuzad and Dr. Markov. Together they watched as children played in a park below, a sight that would have been unthinkable during those dark days of invasion. "We did it," Markov said softly. Grant nodded, but remained silent for a moment longer before finally speaking. "We survived because we fought together, not just as nations or species, but as something greater." Kel'Thuzad tilted her head slightly, a gesture humans had come to recognize as her version of a smile. "You humans are stubborn," she said wryly. "It's both your greatest weakness and your greatest strength." Grant chuckled at that, but quickly grew serious again. "Stubbornness won't be enough next time," he said quietly. "Next time?" Markov asked nervously. Grant turned to face them both, the weight of leadership still visible in his eyes even after all these years, and said, "There will always be another Rossinante out there. Or worse." But then he smiled, a small but genuine smile filled with hope rather than fear, and added, "And when they come, we'll be ready."